Hello fellow makeup lovers, how are you guys doing today? I am so excited to be sharing this video with you because we are starting a new series here on my channel talking about the history of different makeup brands, and today we're going to be starting with L'Oreal because their story is full of twists and turns, scandal. We're talking the richest woman in the entire world is at the head of L'Oreal. It is truly a fascinating story from beginning to end, so we're gonna throw on some full glam and we're gonna dive deep into L'Oreal. If you would like to see more content like this from me, please like, comment, share, subscribe. All of the engagement is so helpful, especially for a video like this where it does take quite a bit of prep work, but you are not going to be disappointed. So let's jump on in. So our story starts off in Paris, 1881, with a young boy being born. His name was Eugène Paul Louis Schuler, and he was the son of a pastry chef. His parents owned a bakery, and he's said to be known as a really hard worker. He would wake up every day super early before school and help his parents with the bakery. He was described as an intelligent boy, and he got really good grades in school and eventually ended up graduating from college. He went on to the Institute of Applied Chemistry and he graduated first in his class, which I'm actually not sure how big of a class it was, and obviously there wasn't women, but it's pretty good. In 1904, he graduated from the institute and he became a lab assistant. So one day Eugène was working in a lab and a barber came in and basically said, "Hey, I really need some help. I'm trying to develop hair dye that is non-toxic," because at the time a lot of hair dyes had risks. There just weren't that many scientific developments when it came to safe hair dyes. And at first Eugène said, "Sure, I'll help you. I'll figure this out with you." But quickly he decided that he wanted to work on his own and be his own boss. He ended up renting out a space to experiment with hair dye and really started dedicating his life to that. He spent 2 years perfecting a formula, and he even was constantly dyeing his own hair and really testing it on himself, which I thought was interesting. I'm not really sure what the social norms were at the time. I'm assuming that's not something that many men would do, but it ended up paying off because in 1904, he officially opened L'Oreal, but it was not called L'Oreal. It was actually quite a mouthful, and I do not speak French, so please don't come for me. It was originally called the Société Française des Teintures Inoffensives pour Cheveux. Please don't come for me. That translates to the Safe Hair Dye Company of France. And the name L'Oreal ended up coming around for two reasons. There was actually a really popular hairstyle at the time, which was called l'auréole, which is really hard for me to pronounce, but that actually came from a French word, auréole, which meant halo. So L'Oreal, the halo around your head. So the company started off in a 2-bedroom apartment where Eugène was manufacturing everything. He was selling everything, like going door to door to different barber shops and trying to sell his product. And he was also delivering. So he was really a one-man show for a minute. And that was on top of obviously developing the product in the first place. And his hair dyes were marketed as risk-free and high quality. And from there, the brand started to grow quickly. By 1910, the products were available in Austria and Italy. And by 1914, they were available in Hungary, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Russia, and Switzerland. So by 1920, L'Oreal had 3 chemists officially on their payroll, and they ended up doing really well after World War I because they had a strategy of buying out other beauty companies, which is definitely something we will see continue to happen through the course of their history. I feel like at this point, we're like, Eugène is an entrepreneur. He's an inspiration. He really took on all of these jobs to start his own company, but Eugène had some fatal flaws. For one, he was not a man of the workers. He was against the 5-day work week, which is kind of funny because now like there's like starting to be some push for a 4-day work week. I can only imagine how blasphemous that would be to him. He also proposed a proportional salary where you would get paid only based on what you were able to put out in an hour, not an hourly wage, and he was also very much against annual paid leave. He did not like that at all. But ironically, because of the push for annual paid leave, there was a lot more people spending time on the beach and having a little bit of vacation days, and it ended up coinciding with his release of sunscreen, the Ombre Solaire sunscreen, and it's said that that product did really well because suddenly there was an increased need for sunscreen, even though he did not want people to have vacation and like be humans who enjoyed their life. Just to keep the timeline going, that sunscreen came out in 1936. L'Oreal also managed to honestly thrive during the Great Depression because of a little thing called the lipstick effect, which is basically just this concept that even if the world is at its absolute worst and the economy is terrible, you still want to indulge in small little things, which I think that most of us can relate to. It's like, oh, like this is happening, that's happening, but like maybe just let me get a nice little lipstick and I'll feel good and like I can power through this. So because of the lipstick effect, apparently that kept a lot of beauty companies rolling even though the whole economy was struggling. World War II officially started in 1939, and L'Oreal / Oden did really well during the war, but that is because he was a little bit all too happy to collaborate with the Nazis. It was believed that he provided meeting space and financial support for a group called LAKEY, which was a French fascist far-right group, and unfortunately, because of his support, he ended up doing really well during the war. Between 1940 and 1944, L'Oreal as a brand quadrupled, and his personal net worth between 1940 and 1943 was 10 times as much as it was before the war. And it's interesting because after the war, he was investigated, but he did not have any repercussions for his actions or his financial support. Oden ended up passing away in 1957 at 76 years old, and that brings us on to his one and only child, and where she takes over the story of L'Oreal. So his daughter was born in 1922 in Paris, and she was named Liliane Schuler. She did go through some tragedy as a child. Her mother passed away when she was only 5 years old. There's not a ton of information out there on her childhood, but I do know that her father ended up marrying her governess. And by the time that Liliane was 15 years old, she did have an apprenticeship at L'Oreal. She was labeling bottles and mixing products. But unfortunately, I'm sure to no one's surprise, Oden had a very old-fashioned mindset, and he believed that men were meant to work and women were meant to stay home. So when he passed, she did inherit the company and she inherited the money, but she did not inherit any of the power. She became the priority shareholder, but the CEO chairman role went to Francois Dallet. Francois continued to acquire more companies, and he really pushed the growth of L'Oreal internationally. In the 1950s, there was a post-war consumer boom, and there was definitely more demand for beauty products, and you saw beauty idols starting to emerge in a way that you hadn't before. For example, Marilyn Monroe. In the 1960s, the research staff of L'Oreal was up to 300 people, and in the 1970s, they came out with the famous marketing of Because I'm Worth It, which eventually turned into Because You're Worth It, which I thought was interesting to see the difference, because I feel like as a woman, it is very easy to look at your friends, your loved ones, other women, and just think you are worth it, but then it's a lot harder to say it to yourself. That slogan also stood out because in the 1970s, there were a lot more women entering the workforce, and by that time, L'Oreal was available in more than 60 countries. So as a brand, they were obviously doing very well, but let's look back into Liliane's personal life, because she didn't really have a whole lot to do with L'Oreal during this time. In 1950, Liliane ended up marrying a politician named Andre Betancourt, and she officially changed her last name to Liliane Bettencourt. Between 1954 and 1973, Andre Bettencourt served in multiple political cabinets, and in 1986, he was even considered for Prime Minister of France. I couldn't find an exact timeline, and some articles that I read said that he was the deputy chairman of L'Oreal for a time, and then others said he was the vice chairman. But in 1994, he ended up resigning because of scandal. It came out that he had actually been also, surprise, surprise, a part of LAKEY, that fascist group we talked about earlier. Apparently, he joined it early in the war and ended up regretting it, and by the end of the war had joined some anti-German resistance. But it was found that he wrote over 60 anti-Semitic articles for a German magazine called La Terre Française, which technically, well, it was a French magazine, but it was funded by the Germans in German-occupied areas of France. Even though he described it as errors of his youth, he did end up resigning from the company. So shortly after that, in 1995, Liliane ended up joining the board of directors, and she was 73 years old, but I believe that was her first time in that position. She did stay married to Andre for over 50 years until he passed in 2007 at the age of 89. And they did have one daughter together, and her name is Francoise Bettencourt. She was born in July of 1953, and it's said that her and her mother had a very tense relationship. But the thing you have to understand is that this was a very rich, very affluent family, and the things that went on in their household were very private. At least that's how it was until 2007 when the Bettencourt affair came about. This is a little bit of a complex situation, but I'm going to walk you through it as easily as I can. So, starting in 1997, Liliane, the daughter of Oden, had a friendship with a celebrity photographer named François-Marie Bagné. And I know that her daughter is also Francois, so we're going to just refer to him as Bagné so that we don't get confused, because there's a lot of Francois in this story. I'm thinking it must just be a common French name. This friendship was a little bit strange. He was much younger than Liliane, and he just seemed to always be getting gifts and money and this and that from her. And it was a little excessive. 3 weeks after Liliane's husband, Andre, passed away, Bagné had a conversation with her and said, you know, your daughter, you don't really like her, you don't have the best relationship. Why don't you make me your sole heir? Apparently this information got to Francois through the house staff, and she had enough, and she filed a case against Bagné for elderly abuse. This obviously had the media in an absolute frenzy because of who they were and, you know, the information being public. But it got even more juicy because apparently the butler of the Bettencourt estate had been secretly recording conversations. I'm not 100% sure why he was recording in the first place. Maybe he was just like really chismoso, but he ended up bringing the recordings to Francois, and he said, here's the information. There's some stuff on here about Bagné. It is incriminalizing. That's the word, right? Incriminalizing. But it is your decision what you do with them. And Francois released them to the public. What started as a case of elderly abuse turned into a huge political scandal. There were discussions of the Minister of Budget in France helping them with their taxes because he was their friend. And the accountant for the Bettencourts came forward and said that she had made multiple withdrawals to go to different politicians. And she also said that for most big fortunes, you get audited every 3 years, and not once in the, I believe, 12 years that she worked for the Bettencourts did they ever get audited. And there's also discussions of tax evasion. The accounts that they have in Switzerland of a private island they're not going to declare. How are you one of the richest families in the world? Like, you will never have to worry about money ever in your entire life and you're not paying your taxes. So there was a case that went against the president, and they ended up saying that like there was no proof. If it was cash payments, there was no proof that he was paid by the Bettencourt, that they gave him 150,000 euros. So he basically got off scot-free. And it's kind of funny because there is a interview of Liliane and the journalist says, like, did you pay off these politicians? And she said, between you and me, I don't remember, but I don't think so. So shortly after that, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Her daughter became her guardian. Bonnier was convicted of elderly abuse, especially because it was not the first time he did it. And he literally had over $1 billion of gifts. He had a private island. He had like priceless paintings, Picasso, like the absolute most. And what's crazy is originally he had a pretty hefty fine. He was supposed to go to jail for 2 years. He did a retrial and basically didn't have to do anything. The asset manager, who was also like very heavily involved in the tax evasion, he's actually the only person that got even a slap on their wrist. He got like 88 days in jail. There is a docuseries on this whole Betancourt affair called The Billionaire, The Butler, and The Boyfriend, I think is what it was. And if you guys watch it, if you're curious to get even more details about this case, asset manager, I feel like everything he was saying was just like a lie through his teeth. Like, I would not trust that man more than I could throw him. Like, I just got an overall icky, bad feeling, just like. Well, Liliane ended up passing away in 2017. And when she passed, she was the richest woman in the world with a net worth of $44.3 billion. She was 94 years old at the time, and luckily she did pass everything on to her daughter, who was her sole heir, and the will that she made when she was having symptoms of dementia, where she listed Bonnier as her sole heir, was not held up. Her daughter is the vice chair, and she holds a 34% stake in the company. Immediately, she became the richest woman in the world. In 2024, she was the first woman ever to have a net worth of $100 billion. Francois did end up marrying a man named Jean-Pierre Myers, and she subsequently became Francois Betancourt Myers, and they have 2 sons together. And what I thought was really interesting and kind of like a twist in the story, because obviously her grandfather had ties with the Nazis, and her husband is actually the grandson of a rabbi who passed away in Auschwitz. So she did adopt her husband's religion, and they are raising their sons in Judaism. So I thought that was interesting that there is a history of obviously being anti-Semitic in the company, and now the future generations are Jewish. But there actually is a tape recording of Liliane talking about her grandson and asking, does he look too Jewish? Which I just thought was so sad. So let's talk about where L'Oreal is as a company now, because they are popping. They are the 36th most valuable company on the entire planet. They have 86,000 employees. They're sold in over 150 countries, but their US customers are actually responsible for 30% of their revenue, and they are the parent brand of so many popular brands, and I can only see them continuing to grow from here. So even if you're looking in your makeup collection, like me, for example, when I went to film this video, I was like, I don't own a full face of L'Oreal. But when I actually look at every single brand that they own, I had almost an entire face of products. I'm just gonna read you a list of some of their most well-known brands. We've got Kiehl's, Lancome, Giorgio Armani Beauty, Ralph Lauren, Clarisonic, Maybelline, Essie, It Cosmetics, Prada Beauty, Viktor and Rolf, Urban Decay, Redken, La Roche-Posay, L'Oreal Paris, Yves Saint Laurent Beauty, CeraVe, and NYX. And I can only imagine that this list is going to continue to grow. So here is the final look. I really hope you enjoyed this story. If there's a particular brand that you'd like to hear about from me next, make sure to comment it down below. And if you're just creeping through the comments and you see a brand that's already been listed, make sure to like that comment so I know. I am tempted to talk about Max Factor next, because he was a makeup artist for the Russian royalty and literally escaped with his life to save his family. So his story is high up on my list. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!